Top news. You stupid prick. Liam Gallagher's weird meeting with McCartney. Not too many people have had the honor of embarrassing themselves directly in front of a Beatle, but Liam Gallagher is one of them. In 2017, Gallagher told Enemy the story of an awkward encounter he once had with Paul McCartney. "I've met him a few times. He's been absolutely a dream," he said. "The last time was at the Royal Albert Hall." He goes, "Why are you always in a rush? Sit down, sit down." I sit down and he goes, "Do you like margaritas?" I said, "Yeah, but I had something before I come out. I don't eat at this time of night." He said, "They're effin' drinks, you stupid prick." I thought he was offering me a pizza. Gallagher told the story again in 2018 speaking to The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, this time noting that he'd asked McCartney for an autograph to pass along to his kid's teacher and that the word the Beatle used to describe him was D-head. Turns out McCartney is a big margarita fan. In 2022, he and his daughter Mary filmed a segment of her Discovery Plus show. Mary McCartney serves it up and showed exactly how the Beatle makes a maccarita. McCartney's recipe, Gallagher, take notes, calls for 4 ounces of tequila, followed by equal parts Cointreau and triple section. Then comes the McCartney twist. Instead of just lime juice, add the juice of either 1 orange or 2 clementinas. Shake in a cocktail shaker with ice. "You've got to sing," McCartney advised, "and you do that till your hand gets cold. Finally, salt the rim if desired, and serve straight up." Picking the best song doesn't always mean checking the Billboard charts. In fact, a scant 4 of Paul McCartney's big hits are here. McCartney didn't aspire to the Beatles' towering achievements on Sgt. Pepper or Abbey Road, but instead came off as a loose, surprisingly unvarnished expression, like someone trying to work out his own sound. That can be the album's strength, but also a notable weakness. Some of this, quite frankly, just sounds like noodling around. But then there was Maybe I'm Amazed. Begun while with the Beatles, it emerged later from a very different place. McCartney is simply boiling with emotion, both light and dark. Yet this tucked-away track didn't initially get its due. Until finally, in 1977, it did, as a live remake from McCartney's second group Wings went to number 10. In keeping with the rest of this album, Backseat of My Car is a little unfocused. It's too overstuffed with ideas, too reliant on multi-track McCartney's, not as rustic as his solo debut, and somehow tossed off sounding anyway, and simply too long. But yet it still perfectly encapsulates everything that makes Ram such a wildly inventive gem. It's gutsy and unprecious at one point, and then a testament to McCartney's enduring pop sensibilities at others. As he bolts from 50s-era rock to cocktail lounge crooning to swooning violins and back again, all inside of this one final track. Mind you, there is a sense of limitless possibility. Often thought of as a response of John Lennon's Imaginera sniping, Dear Friend actually dated back to the sessions for Ram, well before the acid-tongued How Do You Sleep hit store shelves. How their internal band issues evolved into such a public display of enmity remains a matter of intense fan debate. What remains clear, these many years later, is that McCartney reached back across the divide first. He's captured in a haltingly conciliatory mood, something perfectly imparted during this moody, minor-keyed rumination. Dear Friend, in fact, begins with 4 unanswered questions, underscoring his sad confusion. Later, Richard Hewson's strings arrive with a crescendo, like a heartbreaking. Another Ram-era leftover. This track has Beatles' pretensions, and that, along with its inclusion on the deeply flawed Red Rose, gives Get on the Right Thing much of its continued resonance. There's a lot to love here. McCartney sings in the style of his old Little Richard send-ups for one of the last times on an original song. His vocals ascend into a rattling fervor, then whoop and call all the way back down, while still tracing a chaptered compositional style that recalls the best moments from Abbey Road. The song also rocks in a way that drive-by fans might never have guessed after wading through the gauzy web of Strings on My Love, his song for wife and bandmate Linda McCartney. Wings were suddenly whittled down to just a core group of 3, and it put McCartney in a fighting stance. You hear it right away, as a torrent of emotion synthesizes on this album-opening title track. Band on the Run skillfully weaves a desire to break free of the Beatles with an age-old outsider's mythology, setting a tone for everything that follows. This restlessness, a sense of destiny unfulfilled, pushed McCartney to new creative places, and he used every tool in his pop music shed. That's true for this episodic triumph, but also the whole LP. No McCartney project has held together so well, and none showcases his many strengths so successfully. McCartney refused to rest on his laurels after issuing his best solo album. Instead, he set about rebuilding Wings in advance of a far more stylistically diverse recording. As with the follow-up, Venus and Mars didn't always work. But it remains an amiable artifact from a time of deep domesticity for McCartney, an era when likely, in part, because of the success surrounding the multi-platinum Band on the Run, he finally seemed free of the weight of his Beatles fame. That allowed him to try out things like this simmering deep cut, which may be the best Wings song you've never heard. Tony Dorsey's bright brass blasts send McCartney into howls of pain, as he shreds a lyric reportedly aimed at his missing friend, John Lennon. A rare standout moment from the lesser sibling in a suddenly stable two-album run for Wings. McCartney was simply trying too hard to make his second band as democratic as the first, far more talented one had been. He was also in a rush to complete the LP before hitting the road for a celebrated US tour. That led to a few notable missteps. At the speed of sound simply had too much Wings, and not enough Paul McCartney, and some songs that didn't have the heft they might have with more care. The muscular Beware My Love breaks the mold, as McCartney pushes himself into a remarkably layered complexity. Even here, however, he was too much of a team player, keeping a better version in his back pocket that featured John Bonham rather than Wings' Joe English on drums. Oddly enough, Wings promptly began falling apart. By the time sessions for London Town were complete, the group was reduced once again to a trio, but 5 years later, they couldn't pull off another Band on the Run. Instead, London Town often feels small-scale and too precious, save for the synth-driven, R&B-influenced US smash. With a little luck, taps into a well of emotion not heard elsewhere, hinting at McCartney's feelings as a homesick Joe English returned to the US and guitarist Jimmy McCulloch left for a stint with the reformed Small Faces. In truth, this project desperately needed a jolt of punky attitude. McCartney must have realized it, as he subsequently said about restructuring Wings for a final time. A deeply underrated cut, likely because it's part of a disappointing second-half retreat away from this album's earlier rock ambitions. That's a shame, since "To" represents a last blast of new wave inventiveness on Back to the Egg. McCartney's vocal is all Rick Ocasek hiccups and post-punk howls, while Lawrence Uber furiously saws away over a fidgety beat, then runs his guitar, in a moment of smeared brilliance, through an eventide harmonizer during these totally wackadoo solos. Nowhere else is there a greater sense of the fizzy future that never was for this last lineup of Wings. In a few years, of course, this sound would be airing wall-to-wall on MTV. Perhaps unsurprisingly, McCartney appears with an acoustic guitar for one of the strongest tracks on a goofball experimental dud of an album. Sure, he double tracks and weirdly synthesizes his voice. But that's the extent of the adornments found on this quietly effective ballad. Now, quietly effective may sound like a backhanded compliment. It certainly would have been a huge disappointment in previous decades. With its pastoral imagery, One of These Days sounds like it could have been a throwaway from the White Album. But in the 80s, and on an album that found McCartney focused so completely on at-home doodles with a newfangled keyboard, that counts as high praise. Celebrated at the time as a partial Beatles reunion, Take It Away certainly starts that way, with an off-kilter rhythm courtesy of Ringo Starr and all of the tasteful hallmarks of a George Martin production. The song's most interesting new element, however, comes from 10 cubic centimeters alum Eric Stewart, whose presence clearly sparked McCartney to dabble in some of that group's now famous layering of background vocals. Take It Away ends with a soaring loop of wordless sighs from 1,000 Pauls, Erics, and Lindis. In between, you have one of McCartney's patented pop confections, featuring a feverish horn counterpoint, deceptively intricate bass, and an utterly indecipherable narrative. Classic McCartney. If Pipes of Peace sounds like tug-of-war leftovers, That's because it's exactly that. McCartney called Michael Jackson back in for another duet, but Say came off as utterly facile after The Girl Is Mine. McCartney's scattered attempts at modernizing his sound feel forced and became immediately dated. Even a collaboration with Ringo Starr, So Bad, falls flat. Sweetest Little Show, another of those held-over tracks, stands out because of its effortless, wings-like exuberance. There's a reason for that. It grew out of July 1980 jam with the now departed